Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku studied under the Flash. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Muzutafu tasted of concrete dust and fear. It was a taste Izuku Midoriya was becoming far too familiar with. The symphony of chaos was in full swing, the distant shriek of sirens, the percussive boom of a destructive quirk 2 blocks over, the panicked shouts of civilians, and the strained, determined calls of heroes trying to hold the line. This wasn't a single villain with a dramatic flair and a monologue. This was organized. Coordinated. A dozen mid-tier villains hitting a 6-block radius simultaneously, a meticulously planned assault designed to stretch the city's hero resources to their breaking point. And it was working. Ravity, report. West Quadrant is clear, but I've got civilians trapped in the shopping arcade. Achiko Uraraka's voice, though tinny and strained through his earpiece, was a grounding presence. Ribbit. I'm with Edgeshot, handling the underground metro breach, Tsuyu Ajiri added, her tone unnervingly calm. Lots of people down here. The villains are trying to collapse the tunnels. Understood. Izuku grunted, pivoting on the ball of his foot. The iron sole of his boot scraped against asphalt as he dodged a whip-like tendril of hardened tar. I'm still engaged on Chua Avenue. One villain, quirk seems to be tar manipulation. Trying to keep him contained, green lightning, the vibrant, living signature of One for All, danced across his limbs. The energy of full cowling at 15% was a familiar thrum now, a second heartbeat layered over his own. It was a comfortable hum of power, no longer threatening to shatter his bones with every flex. The pain had been replaced by a thrumming responsibility, a constant reminder of the legacy he carried. His opponent, a hulking man in a stained tank top calling himself Blacktop, cackled as he slammed his palms onto the street. The very asphalt seemed to melt and obey his will, surging forward in a black wave. Izuku leaped, the green energy flaring as he ricocheted off the side of a bus stop shelter. Analysis. He's slow, relies on large-scale area of effect attacks. Low mobility. The key is to close the distance before he can turn the entire street into a trap. His mind, as always, was a frantic whirlwind of observation and strategy, the muttering now a silent, efficient internal process. He landed, feet hitting the pavement with a force that sent a spiderweb of cracks through the concrete. He was a green comet, a blur of motion. St. Louis. Smash! He didn't aim for Blacktop. He aimed for the ground just in front of him. The axe kick, powered by 15% of the world's greatest power, was less about direct impact and more about disruption. A shockwave of pressurized air ripped through the street, kicking up a storm of dust and debris and, more importantly, atomizing the wave of tar before it could solidify. Blacktop roared in frustration, momentarily blinded. It was the opening Izuku needed. He shot forward, the world smearing into green-tinted lines. He prepared a Detroit smash, dialing it down to a non-lethal percentage, ready to end the fight and move on to the next crisis point. That's when he felt it. A peculiar pressure in the air. A static charge that had nothing to do with his own quirk. The space behind Blacktop seemed to shimmer, like heat haze on a summer day, but it was wrong. Distorted. The light bent around a single point, folding in on itself as if reality were a piece of paper being creased. At the center of the distortion stood a new figure. A man, thin and wiry, in a dark, form-fitting suit covered in what looked like shattered mirror fragments. His eyes, wide and manic, darted around, not seeing the fight, but something beyond it. More of you? The man, whom Izuku would later learn was called Voidgazer, whispered, his voice thin and reedy. Always more. Tearing the fabric. Making it weak. Izuku skidded to a halt, his battle instincts screaming. This was the source of the strange pressure. This was a new, unknown threat. Blacktop was just a distraction. Civilian, get back! Izuku yelled, his voice sharp. It's not safe here. Voidgazer just giggled, a sound like cracking glass. Safe? There is no safe. There is only the tapestry, and you heroes and villains, you pull at the threads. He raised a hand, and the shimmering intensified. The world behind him didn't just bend, it fractured. A circular rift, no larger than a manhole cover, tore open in the air. It wasn't a portal of swirling energy like Kurogyres. It was a void. A patch of absolute nothingness that drank the light and sound around it. A piece of debris, kicked up by Izuku's earlier smash, drifted too close. It didn't get sucked in. It simply ceased to exist, vanishing at the edge of the void. Izuku's blood ran cold. Annihilation. Erasure. This was a quirk on a completely different level of terrifying. His focus was absolute, his gaze locked on Voidgazer. So absolute, in fact, that he almost missed the small whimper to his left. A little girl, no older than 6, clutching a stuffed rabbit, had been hiding behind a mailbox. In the chaos, she'd stumbled out, her face a mask of terror, frozen directly in the path between Blacktop and Izuku. Blacktop, recovering his senses, saw his chance. "Get out of my way, brat!" he bellowed, launching a spear of hardened tar not at Izuku, but at the child. Simultaneously, Voidgazer's arms swept wide. The nothingness portal didn't move, but the space around it warped, dragging the street and everything on it towards the rift. The pull was immense, a silent, irresistible tide. The little girl cried out, her tiny feet sliding across the asphalt. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, every microsecond a decision. Threat 1, tar spear. Fast, lethal. Threat 2, spatial rift. Absolute erasure. Objective, save the child. There was no choice. There was never a choice. Full cowling. He roared, the green lightning erupting from him in a torrential storm. He didn't even think about the percentage. He just pushed. More. He was a green thunderbolt. He intercepted the tar spear with an iron-souled kick, shattering it into 1,000 sticky droplets. In the same motion, he scooped the child into his arms, her small body trembling against his chest. He shielded her with his own body, turning his back to the rift. The pull was stronger now, a physical hand grabbing at his back, trying to peel him off the face of the earth. His boots screeched, gouging deep trenches in the road as he fought against the invisible current. "It's okay," he grunted, his voice tight with strain. "I've got you." He risked a glance over his shoulder. He'd saved her, but he was now caught. The rift was only 10 feet away, and its gravitational pull on the spacetime around it was increasing exponentially. He could feel his own energy, the sacred fire of one for all, being stretched thin, pulled towards the abyss. "You pull the thread!" Voidgazer shrieked, his eyes wild with insane glee. So be unraveled. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Izuku spun around and threw. He put every ounce of one for all he could muster into that single motion, launching the little girl like a shot put away from the danger, towards the relative safety of the storefronts 100 feet away. He saw her land, cushioned by a pile of trash bags, scared but safe. Relief washed over him, pure and absolute. It lasted for a single, glorious heartbeat. Then the world ended. The pull became absolute. He had no more purchase, no more ground to fight against. His back hit the edge of the rift, and the sensation was not one of falling, but of being fundamentally unmade. It was a dissonant chord played on the strings of his soul. Pain, white-hot and absolute, erupted behind his eyes. It felt like every cell in his body was being ripped apart, and put back together in the wrong order. One for all, the bonfire in his spirit, roared in protest, a maelstrom of green energy fighting against the absolute nothingness. The sights and sounds of Mizurufu vanished, replaced by a torrent of incomprehensible color and noise. He was tumbling through a non-space, a river of fractured moments and bleeding light. He saw glimpses of things that made no sense. A world of towering crystal spires, a sky filled with 3 suns, the face of All Might flickering like a dying ember. His consciousness, his very sense of self, was fraying at the edges. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He was ejected. Violently. The transition from non-space to reality was a physical blow. He slammed into something hard, the impact rattling every bone in his body. The world came back into focus with the deafening crack of shattering pavement. He lay at the bottom of a shallow crater, the epicenter of a web of fractures spreading across a wide, black street. The sky above was a brilliant, unfamiliar blue, dotted with fluffy white clouds. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes, hot dogs, and something else, a clean, crisp scent, like the air after a thunderstorm. Pain was a roaring ocean in his head. His body screamed in protest. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his vision swimming. His hero costume, his pride and joy, was in tatters. The armor plates were cracked, the green fabric ripped and frayed. His mask was gone, and one of his gloves had been torn away completely. He looked around, his mind struggling to catch up. This wasn't Mizurufu. The buildings were wrong. They were taller, sleeker, monoliths of glass and steel that stabbed at the sky. The cars were different, caviar and more colorful. The billboards were filled with letters he could read, but the language was wrong. English. He knew it from his classes, but hearing it spoken all around him was utterly disorienting. What the? Did you see that? He just appeared. Holy crap, look at the road. The shouts of the crowd were a meaningless babble to his ears. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his consciousness. Where am I? What happened? The villain, the portal, the girl, is she okay? He tried to stand, but a wave of nausea and vertigo sent him crashing back to one knee. He could feel the vestiges of one for all within him, but they were agitated. Skittish. Like a spooked horse. The energy wasn't flowing correctly. It felt like it was pushing against an invisible, opposing force, creating a painful friction deep within his cells. A siren wailed, this one with a different pitch, a high-low wail that was alien to his ears. People were pointing, shouting, filming with their phones. He was the center of a disaster, a freak show. Okay, Midoriya, think. Assess. First, find a hero. Explain the situation. They can help me get back. All Might, he must be worried sick. Everyone. He clenched his fist, the tattered remains of his glove crinkling. He had to stay calm. He was a hero. He had to. The world blurred. It wasn't his vision failing. The entire scene, the crowd, the cars, the buildings, smeared for a split second, as if viewed from a speeding train. A gust of wind, powerful and localized, kicked up dust from the crater he'd made. It was over in an instant, but the effect was profound. When his perception caught up, the scene had changed. The panicked civilians closest to the crater were gone. Not vanished, but moved. They were now standing 50 feet away, on the sidewalk, looking just as confused as he was, but safe. A perimeter had been established, not by police tape, but by an unseen force that had simply relocated everyone out of the immediate danger zone. And in the center of it all, between Izuku and the gawking crowd, stood a man. He was clad in a suit of deep, burnished scarlet. Golden lines, like stylized lightning bolts, accented his waist, wrists, and the emblem on his chest, a single, sharp bolt of lightning inside a white circle. His cowl was sleek, covering his upper face but leaving his mouth and a firm, determined jaw exposed. Golden earpieces, shaped like wings or smaller bolts, framed the sides of his head. He wasn't vibrating. He wasn't crackling with energy. He was just still. An island of impossible calm in the middle of the chaos he had just single-handedly contained. Izuku's hero-analyst brain, even in its panic state, kicked into overdrive. New person. Hero? Villain? Costume suggests hero. Powers, super speed. Incredibly high level. Moved at least a dozen people in less than a second without any visible strain. No collateral damage. Precise. Controlled. The man in red took a slow step forward, his movements fluid and economical. His gaze was fixed on Izuku, and his expression was not one of aggression, but of intense, cautious curiosity. Easy there, the man said, his voice calm and steady. The words were English, a smooth baritone that did nothing to soothe Izuku's frayed nerves. He couldn't understand the words, only the tone. You're safe. Just stay put. Izuku pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. His legs felt like jelly. He raised his hands in a gesture that he hoped was universal for I mean no harm, but his body was tensed, ready to spring. Every instinct, honed by battles against the League of Villains, screamed at him. An unknown individual with unimaginable power had just appeared at the site of a disaster he had caused. In his experience, that was never a good sign. Who are you? Izuku asked, his own voice hoarse, the Japanese words feeling thick and useless in his mouth. The man in red tilted his head, his expression softening with something that looked like confusion, and perhaps a flicker of pity. He obviously didn't understand. He tapped the side of his cowl. "Cisco, you getting this?" the man said, his voice lower now. "Languages. Japanese, I think. Run a trace. And tell me what I'm looking at with these energy readings. My suit's diagnostics are going haywire." A pause. Izuku watched, his heart hammering against his ribs. The man's eyes widened slightly behind his cowl. "Are you serious? Like off the charts how? A living nuclear reactor?" "No, that's not it. Cisco, it feels chaotic. Like two different songs playing in the same room, loud. One of them feels familiar, like a storm. The other is something else entirely." Izuku didn't know what was being said, but he saw the shift in the man's posture. The caution was ramping up into alarm. This person saw him as a threat. A bomb about to go off. He thinks I'm a villain. The thought was a spike of ice in his gut. After everything he'd been through, after all the pain and sacrifice, to be seen as the very thing he fought against, it was unbearable. "No," Izuku said, shaking his head desperately. "I'm a hero. Hero." He pointed at his own chest, at the tattered remains of his costume. "Hero. Yui," the man in red held up a hand, a placating gesture. "Okay, kid. Okay. I hear you. But the energy coming off you is unstable. I need you to just relax. Can you do that for me? Relax?" How could he relax? He was in an unknown place, possibly another country, maybe even. His mind reeled at the thought, another world. He was injured, alone, and facing someone whose speed made All Might in his prime look like he was standing still. Panic won. His training, his instincts, everything screamed at him to be ready. He needed to defend himself. He needed to be able to run. He needed power. He dropped into a low fighting stance, the familiar crouch that preceded full cowling. "I don't want to fight you," he shouted, the words a desperate plea. "But I will if I have to." The man in red sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Kid, please don't." Izuku ignored him. He closed his eyes and reached inward, calling upon the power of One for All. He braced himself for the familiar, comforting surge of energy, the green lightning that was as much a part of him as his own blood. What he got was agony. The moment he tried to draw on OFA, the invisible, opposing force he'd felt earlier slammed into it. It wasn't a push, it was an invasion. A foreign energy, crackling and kinetic, tried to pour into the channels of his body that were already filled with the stockpiled power of the vestiges. It was like trying to force two positive poles of a magnet together. An involuntary scream was ripped from his throat. It wasn't a sound of pain, but of pure, systemic violation. The green lightning of One for All sputtered to life, but it was twisted, corrupted. It was a sickly, violent green, flickering and unstable, and it sparked against his skin with a searing heat. Arcs of it lashed out, not in a controlled aura, but in wild, uncontrolled whips of energy that struck the ground, blasting chunks of asphalt into the air. His body felt like it was being torn in two. One force, the boundless, life-giving energy of OFA, was trying to explode outward. The other, an insistent, universal law of motion and kinetics, was trying to flow through him, demanding he obey its physics. The conflict was happening at a subatomic level. His cells vibrated, threatening to tear themselves apart under the paradoxical strain. Whoa, whoa, whoa! The man in red was in front of him in an instant, the air displacing with a whump. He was no longer cautious. His face was a mask of genuine alarm. "Stop! You're tearing yourself apart." Through a haze of blinding pain, Izuku saw the scarlet figure reaching for him. Villain! The thought, primal and terrified, was all that was left. He had to fight back. He had to get away. He tried to throw a punch, to channel the building, agonizing power into a single blow. It was a mistake. The dam broke. The clashing energies could no longer be contained. With a sound that was both a deafening thunderclap and a high-pitched dimensional shriek, the power erupted from him. It wasn't a smash. It wasn't a controlled release. It was a detonation. A sphere of pure, chaotic energy exploded outwards. It was a blinding fusion of emerald green and a brilliant, terrifying gold he'd never seen before. The very air warped and sizzled. The ground beneath him vaporized. The shockwave it produced was immense, a physical blow that sent cars skidding and shattered every window for a block in every direction. For the man in red, it was like being hit by a tidal wave of pure paradox. He felt the raw, kinetic backlash through the speed force, a wave of energy that was both part of his world and utterly alien to it. It was like a dissonant note in the song of the universe, and it was excruciating. He braced himself, vibrating his own molecules to try and phase through the worst of it, but the sheer power was staggering. It wasn't malicious. It was just pain. Uncontrolled and absolute. Izuku was at the center of his own personal sun. The pain was gone, replaced by a terrifying, all-encompassing numbness. His vision tunneled, the brilliant light fading to a pinpoint. He felt his consciousness untethering, slipping away into a welcome, silent darkness. The last thing he saw, the very last image burned into his retinas before the world went black, was the man in the scarlet suit. The blast had thrown him back, but he was already on his feet, rushing forward, a blur of motion against the fading light. And the expression on his face, now clearly visible as he knelt over Izuku's collapsing form, wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was a look of deep, profound concern. Then nothing. The green comet had burned out, leaving only silence and a smoking crater on a street in a world that was not his own. The first sensation was not pain, but peace. A quiet, floating darkness that held him like a cradle. There was no chaos, no tearing sensation, no agonizing conflict of energies. There was only a profound and welcome silence. It was a tempting void, a place where the crushing weight of his legacy, the constant thrum of power, and the terror of the unknown simply ceased to be. He could stay here forever, but a hero's work is never done. A faint, rhythmic beeping began to intrude upon the silence. Beep, beep, beep. It was steady, insistent, pulling him from the placid abyss back toward the messy, complicated world of the living. With the beeping came other sensations. The coarse, clean scent of antiseptic. The soft, surprising weight of a wool blanket draped over him. The dull, throbbing ache that radiated from every point in his body, a phantom memory of the explosive energy that had ripped through him. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. The ceiling was a dark gray grid of acoustic tiles, punctuated by humming fluorescent lights. Not a hospital. Too industrial. He turned his head slowly, the movement sending a fresh wave of dizziness through him. He was lying on a cot in a vast, circular room. The walls were lined with banks of computers, holographic displays that flickered with complex data streams, and racks of esoteric equipment that made his own support tech-loving heart skip a beat. It was a place of science and secrets, a command center humming with latent power. A figure moved into his line of sight, and he flinched, his muscles tensing for a fight he knew he couldn't win. Easy, easy, a gentle voice said. You're safe here. The speaker was a woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a smile that seemed capable of calming a hurricane. She held her hands up, palms open, a gesture of peace. She pulled a chair closer to his cot and sat, moving with a quiet confidence that filled the space around her. Izuku stared, his mind struggling to process. He didn't understand her words, but her tone was a universal language of reassurance. He noticed she was the one who had placed the blanket over him, a small act of kindness that felt monumental in his state of utter disorientation. Iris, he's waking up, another voice called out, this one sharper, more clinical. Vitals are stabilizing, but his bioenergy output is still. I don't have a word for it. It's like listening to a symphony and a death metal concert at the same time through the same speaker. He saw a second woman now, with auburn hair and a doctor's focused intensity, her eyes glued to a monitor beside his bed. The screen was a chaotic scribble of green and gold lines fighting for dominance on a graph. Is that a bad thing? A third voice, male and vibrating with barely contained excitement, chimed in. Because it sounds awesome. Dude's vitals look like a Jackson Pollock painting. A beautiful, terrifying, we should probably be in a bunker painting. This came from a man with long dark hair and a t-shirt emblazoned with a pixelated spaceship. He was leaning over a console, his fingers flying across a keyboard, bringing up window after window of data. His fascination was so palpable it was almost unnerving. Izuku tried to sit up, his mind racing. Where am I? Who are these people? The man in red, was he a hero? Did he bring me here? He was vulnerable, powerless, and surrounded by unknowns. But he saw no restraints, no menacing guards. The atmosphere wasn't one of a prison, but more like a very concerned, very high-tech research facility. His movement caught their attention. All three of them looked at him. The kind woman, Iris, smiled again. The doctor, Caitlin, offered a more cautious, professional half-smile. The excited man, Cisco, just beamed. Hey, man. Welcome back to the land of the conscious, Cisco said, giving him a little wave. You gave us quite a scare. And a heck of a light show. 10 out of 10 on the pyrotechnics, by the way. Very dramatic entrance. Izuku just blinked, the English words washing over him without meaning. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, hoarse croak came out. He pointed to his own chest, then made a vague gesture to the room around them, a silent question. Who are you? Where is this place? He can't understand us, Iris said softly. She looked toward the entrance of the room. Barry? The name was spoken just as the man himself walked in. It was him. The man in the scarlet suit, but without his cowl. His face was open and earnest, with kind eyes and sandy brown hair slightly messy from having just pulled the mask off. He looked less like a fearsome speedster and more like a friendly, slightly stressed-out science teacher. He was holding a small, metallic case. He approached the cot, and Izuku instinctively tensed again, the memory of their brief, explosive confrontation still fresh. Barry noticed and stopped a few feet away, raising a placating hand just as Iris had done. It's okay, he said, his voice the same calm baritone Izuku remembered. He looked at Cisco. Got the translators ready? Ready to rock, Cisco replied, plucking two small, silver earbuds from the case Barry was holding. Based on preliminary vocal analysis from the street recording, I've programmed them for modern standard Japanese. Might be a few hiccups with slang or regional dialects, but it should get the job done. I call them babble buds. You know, like the fish? But less slimy, and you don't have to stick them in your ear canal. Wait, you do have to stick them in your ear. Okay, so it's a working title. Barry took one of the buds and held it out to Izuku, his movements slow and deliberate. He pointed to his own ear, then to the device, then to Izuku's ear. The message was clear. Izuku hesitated for a long moment, his gaze flicking between the four faces in the room. He saw no malice. Only concern, curiosity, and a desperate attempt to communicate. He gave a small, jerky nod. He took the earbud. It was cool to the touch and hummed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. He placed it carefully in his ear. There was a faint crackle, a soft chime, and then Cisco spoke again. So anyway, I was thinking we could market them. Cisco's babble buds, now you're talking. What do you think, Caitlin? This time, Izuku understood every word. It was as if his brain had suddenly been given a key to a lock he didn't know existed. The words were still English, but they were simultaneously Japanese. It was a bizarre, disorienting experience, but it worked. I think you should focus on the potentially reality-breaking paradox sitting on our medbay cot, Caitlin replied dryly, but her eyes landed on Izuku. Can you understand us now? Izuku's own eyes widened in shock. He nodded slowly. Yes, he whispered, his voice still rough. I can. How? A little Star Labs welcome wagon, Barry said, a small smile touching his lips. He finally walked the rest of the way to the cot. My name is Barry Allen. The woman who gave you the blanket is my wife, Iris West Allen. The doctor keeping you from exploding is Dr. Caitlin Snow, and the man with the terrible marketing ideas is Cisco Ramon. This is Star Labs. Izuku absorbed the information, his mind a maelstrom. Barry Allen? Star Labs. A wife? This was all too normal, too domestic, for the godlike speed he had witnessed. I am Midoriya Izuku, he said, forcing himself to sit up straighter, trying to project a sliver of the composure a UA student should have. I am a student at UA High School's Hero course. I don't know how I got here. We've got a theory about that, Barry said, his expression turning serious. The villain you were fighting, the one who made that portal, we think he didn't just open a door. He tore a hole in the fabric between dimensions. Between worlds. He gestured to Cisco, who swiped a hand across his console. A large holographic display shimmered to life in the center of the room. It showed a stylized image of a blue sphere labeled Earth 1. This is our world, Barry explained, his voice taking on the patient tone of a lecturer. But it's not the only one. There's an infinite number of Earths, all vibrating at a different frequency, all existing in the same space but separated by a dimensional barrier. We call it the multiverse. The display zoomed out, revealing dozens, then hundreds of other spheres, all labeled with different numbers. You, Midoriya, are from one of them. We just don't know which one yet. Izuku stared, utterly captivated. A multiverse. It was the stuff of comic books, of theoretical physics lectures he'd only half paid attention to. And he was living it. His analytical brain, starved for information, kicked into high gear. So the villain's quirk, it didn't just warp space, it punctured the dimensional wall? He muttered, his voice picking up speed. That would require an incredible amount of energy, far beyond what he seemed capable of. Unless it wasn't about power but about frequency. If he could match the specific vibrational frequency of the barrier, maybe he didn't need to break it, just phase through it. But that doesn't explain how I was pulled through. The pull was immense. Was it a side effect? Or was I the target? And the energy I'm feeling now, this resistance inside me, is that my body reacting to the baseline frequency of this new Earth? Is my biology itself out of sync with this reality? He trailed off, suddenly aware that the four of them were staring at him. Cisco had his jaw open in a look of profound respect. Caitlin was scribbling notes on a tablet. Iris looked amused. Barry just chuckled. Okay, Barry said. So you get it. Good. That saves us about an hour. He pointed a thumb at his own chest. On my Earth, I'm a hero. They call me the Flash. Izuku's head snapped up. The Flash? He repeated. The name felt right. It was simple, direct, and perfectly described what he had seen. A flash of scarlet and gold. I'm a speedster, Barry continued. My speed comes from a connection to an extra-dimensional energy source called the Speed Force. It governs all motion in the multiverse. When you came through that rift, it seems you didn't just pass through the walls between our worlds. The passage was so violent, so chaotic, that it forcibly, it plugged you in. Izuku's blood ran cold. Plugged me in? To this Speed Force? Exactly, Caitlin confirmed, her expression grim. And that's the problem. Your body already has a pre-existing energy source. A powerful one. We've never seen anything like it. The two energies, your power and the Speed Force, are incompatible. They're at war inside your body. On a cellular level, Izuku looked down at his hands. He thought of One for All, the sacred torch passed down through generations, a beacon of hope and sacrifice. And now, it was being invaded by a foreign power. It wasn't just a clash of energies. It was a violation. We need to see what we're dealing with, Barry said, his tone shifting from lecturer to leader. We need to know what happens when you try to use your power intentionally. Under controlled circumstances. He gestured toward a massive, heavily reinforced chamber at the far end of the lab. Inside it sat a sleek, futuristic treadmill. That's the cosmic treadmill. It's designed to absorb and analyze kinetic and dimensional energy. It's the safest place for you to try this. A knot of dread and determination tightened in Izuku's stomach. He was a hero. And heroes don't back down from a challenge, especially one that could provide answers. Okay, he said, swinging his legs off the cot. His body still ached, but his resolve was hardening. Let's do it. The air inside the treadmill chamber was cool and smelled of ozone. The massive device sat in the center of the room like an altar to science. Izuku, still in the tattered remains of his costume, stepped onto the belt, his iron-soled boots clanking softly on the metallic surface. All right, Izuku, Barry's voice echoed from a speaker in the ceiling. He, Iris, Caitlin, and Cisco were in the main control room, separated by a thick wall of transparent aluminum. We're going to start slow. Just walk. We need a baseline reading. Izuku nodded and began to walk. The belt moved smoothly under his feet. He felt normal. The internal friction was still there, a low-grade hum of discomfort, but it was manageable. In the control room, however, it was a different story. Holy Mother of Nora, Cisco breathed, staring at his monitor. He's just walking and the treadmill's kinetic energy siphon is already at 12% capacity. The ambient energy radiating off him is off the charts. It's like a leaky faucet, but for reality-bending power. The two energy signatures are distinct, Caitlin observed, pointing to her own screen. Look! The green line, that must be his innate power. It's stable, high output, a massive reservoir. But the gold line, the speed force, is chaotic. It's not flowing through him like it does with you, Barry. It's trying to force its way in, and his energy is pushing back. They're grinding against each other. Okay, Izuku, Barry said, his voice tense. Now I need you to try and access your power. Just a little. The way you normally would. Izuku took a deep breath. He closed his eyes, picturing the egg in the microwave, the first step in mastering full cowling. He reached for that familiar wellspring of power, the burning core of One for All. He pulled. Just 1%. A jolt, sharp and unpleasant, shot through him. The green aura of OFA flickered around him, but it was thin, watery. A single, errant spark of gold lightning crackled off his knuckle and vanished. Spike! Cisco yelled. Huge, dissonant energy spike. The two waveforms just slammed into each other. It's not working, Izuku grunted, his teeth gritted. The feeling was deeply unsettling. It was like trying to breathe with a hand clamped over his mouth. Try a little more, Barry urged, his knuckles white as he gripped the control console. 5%. Full cowling. Izuku's expression hardened. 5% was easy now. It was second nature. He knew the feeling, the comfortable hum of power spreading through his limbs. He focused, pushing past the initial resistance, forcing his body to obey. Full cowling. 5%. This time, the result was spectacular and terrifying. The green lightning of One for All erupted around him, but it was instantly met by a furious storm of golden speed force energy. The two forces didn't mix, they collided. They wrapped around his body in a chaotic, warring helix of emerald and gold. The air crackled with immense power, the sound a gut-wrenching shriek of tearing metal and rolling thunder. The cosmic treadmill groaned, the lights on its frame flickering violently. The belt beneath his feet began to glow, superheated by the sheer energy pouring off him. Barry, his cellular structure is destabilizing. Caitlin shouted, her medical calm finally breaking. The kinetic friction is generating quantum-level heat. He's literally cooking himself from the inside out. Pain slammed into Izuku. It was the agony from the street, magnified tenfold. Every nerve ending was on fire. He could feel his own molecules vibrating at an impossible, destructive frequency. The power was immense, far greater than 5% should feel, but it was wild, untamed, and utterly agonizing. He cried out, falling to one knee on the treadmill, his hands pressed to his chest as if to hold himself together. Shut it down! Iris yelled. Barry, get him out of there! I can't! Cisco shouted back, his hands a blur on the console. The energy feedback is too intense. It's overwhelming the dampeners. If I try a hard shutdown, the backlash could level this entire wing. Inside the chamber, Izuku fought to regain control. This is wrong! His mind screamed. This isn't power, it's poison! He tried to deactivate full cowling, to push the energy back down, but it was like trying to cap a volcano. The speed force, now that it had a taste, was pouring into him, using the channels opened by One for All as a conduit, while OFA fought back with all the fury of its 8 predecessors. He was the battlefield. I can't, stop it! He choked out, his vision blurring, black spots dancing at the edges. In the control room, Barry made a decision. There was no other choice. Cisco, open the door. Barry, no! The energy blast. Just do it! With a hiss of hydraulics, the transparent aluminum door slid open. A wall of heat and raw, paradoxical energy blasted into the control room, sending papers and loose objects flying. Before anyone could react, a blur of scarlet and gold shot past them. Barry was inside the chamber. He moved at a speed that made the chaotic energy storm around Izuku look slow. To him, the lashing tendrils of green and gold lightning were moving like lazy snakes. He ran onto the treadmill, his own golden lightning a calm, controlled river next to Izuku's raging ocean. "Izuku, listen to me," Barry said, his voice cutting through the roar. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. The moment he made contact, a torrent of chaotic feedback shot up his arm, making him grunt in pain. It felt like grabbing a live power line that was also screaming in 1,000 different languages. "You have to let one go. You can't fight both. Stop trying to use your power. Let it go. Just breathe." Izuku looked up, his eyes wide with pain and panic. He saw Barry's face, determined and unafraid, a bastion of calm in the hurricane. He saw a mentor. A hero. Let it go. It was the opposite of every instinct he had. His entire life, he'd been fighting to gain power, to hold onto it, to master it. To let it go felt like admitting defeat. But looking at Barry, he knew he had to trust him. He stopped pushing. He stopped fighting. He released his hold on One for All. The effect was instantaneous. The green lightning sputtered and died, receding back into his body. Without the opposing force, the golden speed force energy had nothing to fight against. For a terrifying second, it surged, threatening to consume him entirely. But then, without the channels of Oafe to guide it, it dissipated, grounding itself through the treadmill and through Barry. The roaring shriek died down to a low hum, then silence. The only sound was the ragged, desperate gasps of Izuku's breathing. He collapsed forward, the last of his strength gone. Barry caught him, easily supporting his weight. The paradox was over. For now. Back on the cot in the medbay, the silence was heavy. Cisco was running frantic diagnostics on the burnout treadmill. Iris was making coffee, her movements tight with residual stress. Barry stood beside the cot, his arms crossed, his face a grim mask. Caitlin finally looked up from her tablet, her expression dire. "It's worse than I thought," she said, her voice low and serious. The clash created what I can only describe as a biokinetic schism in his cells. His DNA is stable for now, but the exposure has made it incredibly volatile. If he tries to use his power like that again, it won't just hurt him. His cellular structure could decohere. He could literally be vibrated apart, erased from existence. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Erased. It was a fate worse than death. Izuku stared at the blanket, his hands clenched into tight fists. All his life he had been powerless. He'd finally been given this incredible gift, this chance to be a hero, and now he was being told that to use it was to commit suicide. The irony was so cruel it was almost laughable. He was back to where he started, a boy with a hero's heart, trapped in a body that couldn't keep up. "So that's it?" Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. I can't use my quirk? I'm useless." "No," Barry said, his voice cutting through Izuku's despair. "That's not it." He pulled up a chair, mirroring Iris's earlier action. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Izuku, you're looking at this like a fighter. Power against power. You're trying to win. That's how you learn to use One for All, right? By forcing your body to endure, by pushing through the pain." Izuku nodded numbly. He remembered shattering his bones over and over again. "The speed force doesn't work that way," Barry continued. "You can't fight it. You can't command it. It's a fundamental force of the universe. Trying to overpower it is like trying to punch gravity. It's a losing battle." "Then what do I do?" Izuku asked, a flicker of his old, desperate hope returning. "You stop fighting," Barry said simply. "You learn to listen. The speed force isn't just power, it's a part of you now, whether you like it or not. One for All is two. You're not two different energies in one body. You're one person with two energies. The goal isn't to make one defeat the other. The goal is to make them work together. To find harmony." He stood up and walked to the center of the room. "I can't teach you how to use One for All. That's your legacy. But I can teach you how to be a speedster. I can teach you the mindset. And the first lesson is the hardest one, especially for someone like you. He turned to face Izuku, his expression firm but encouraging. The first lesson is about control. And control doesn't start with running faster. It starts with standing still. He held up a single finger. Forget full cowling. Forget smashing things. Forget everything you know about powering up. I want you to stand in the middle of this room, and I want you to just feel. Feel the two energies inside you. Don't push them. Don't pull them. Just acknowledge them. Find the quiet place in the center of your own personal hurricane. Izuku looked from Barry's determined face to his own trembling hands. It sounded impossible. To be still, when every fiber of his being screamed to act, to do something, to fix this. But as he looked at the hero before him, a man who had run into a storm of paradoxical energy to save him without a moment's hesitation, he knew he had no other choice. This was his new path. His new training. He wasn't just learning to master a new power. He was learning to master himself. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was the ninth holder of One for All, and now, he was something more. He was a living paradox, and his first lesson was about to begin. The Star Labs training facility was less of a gym, and more of a cathedral dedicated to the physics of motion. It was a cavernous, circular chamber, larger than the UA Heroics course's entire ground beta. The walls were a dark, non-reflective polymer designed to absorb stray kinetic energy. A complex obstacle course, a forest of retractable poles, floating platforms, and shifting walls, was currently recessed into the floor, leaving a vast, open space. High above, a ring of sensors and high-speed cameras tracked every movement, every flicker of energy, feeding a torrent of data back to the main control room. Izuku stood in the center of it all, feeling impossibly small. He wore a simple black training uniform provided by Star Labs, a stark contrast to his vibrant hero costume. The fabric was a smart textile, woven with microsensors that monitored his vitals, a fact Cisco had explained with giddy excitement. On his feet were a pair of prototype sneakers, gold and red, designed by Cisco to handle high-velocity friction without turning into sad little puddles of goo. They felt light, responsive, and utterly alien. He clenched and unclenched his fists, the motion stiff. The events of the previous day played on a loop in his mind, the agony of the clashing energies, the terror of losing control, and Dr. Snow's grim prognosis. Decoherence. Erased from existence. The words echoed in the hollow space where his confidence used to be. You ready? Barry Allen's voice, calm and steady, came from the doorway. He wasn't in his flash suit, just a comfortable Star Labs sweatshirt and jeans. He carried 2 bottles of water, tossing one to Izuku, who caught it reflexively. I think so, Izuku replied, his voice betraying his uncertainty. He took a nervous sip of water. What's the first step? Running? Strength tests? He was trying to frame it in terms he understood, the grueling physical trials of his training with all might. Barry shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. The opposite. The first law of motion, an object in motion stays in motion, and an object at rest stays at rest. You, Izuku, are an object in perpetual, chaotic motion, even when you're standing still. We need to find you at rest. He walked to the center of the room, standing a few feet from Izuku. Forget everything you know about powering up. One for all, from what you've described, is an explosion. You fill yourself up until you burst. The speed force is different. It's a river. It's always flowing. You don't create the current, you just learn to step into it. Barry held up his hand, and for a split second it blurred, vibrating so fast it became translucent. Golden lightning, calm and controlled, danced around his fingers. This is the first lesson for every speedster. Vibration. Phasing. It's not about power. It's about control. It's about finding a specific frequency and holding it. He stopped, his hand solid again. Think of every object in the universe, every wall, every piece of steel, as a note being played on an instrument. It has a natural, resonant frequency. To phase through it, you just have to match the note. You have to vibrate your own molecules at the exact same frequency as the wall. You don't break through it. You become part of its song for a moment and pass through. Izuku listened, his analytical mind latching onto the concept. So it's not brute force. It's resonance. Exactly, Barry said, his eyes lighting up. And right now you have two instruments inside you, playing two different songs. One is a roaring, heroic anthem, he gestured, indicating one for all. The other is the constant, rhythmic hum of the universe itself, he said, indicating the speed force. They're creating a horrible, discordant noise. Your job is to find a harmony between them, to find one, single, clear note. He pointed to a simple, 3-foot-thick wall of reinforced concrete that had risen from the floor at the edge of the training area. That's your first opponent. Don't try to punch it. Don't try to break it. Just try to touch the other side. The instruction was so simple, yet it felt like the most impossible task he'd ever been given. He took a deep breath, walked over to the wall, and placed his hand a few inches from its surface. He could feel the cool, solid reality of it. Okay. A single note. Not a power-up. He closed his eyes, shutting out the world. He tried to listen, not with his ears, but with his entire being. He reached inward, expecting to feel the familiar, comforting bonfire of one for all. It was there, but it was agitated, a caged lion pacing back and forth. Encircling it was the other thing, the speed force, a relentless golden river threatening to flood everything. He could feel them grinding against each other, a low, painful friction that was a constant presence now. Don't fight. Listen. Barry's words echoed in his head. He tried to ignore the two warring powers and find a quiet place between them. He focused on the idea of vibration, of a gentle hum. He imagined a tuning fork, struck once, ringing with a pure, clear tone. He tried to coax his own molecules into mimicking that sound. For a moment he felt something. A faint tremor in his hand. A subtle shift. But his instincts, honed by years of powerlessness and months of brutal training, betrayed him. The moment he felt the power begin to manifest, his body reacted as it always had. It pushed. He only meant to feed a tiny trickle of one for all into the vibration, to give it some substance. It was like adding a single drop of gasoline to a spark. Boom. The sound wasn't just loud, it was a physical thing. A concussive wave of force erupted from his hand, not as a punch, but as a sonic blast. The air in front of the wall compressed and detonated. Izuku was thrown backward, skidding across the polished floor. The concrete wall itself didn't break, but the surface was blasted clean, a fine layer of dust atomized. High above, every single light fixture in the training chamber shattered simultaneously, raining down a shower of glass and metal that harmlessly sizzled out as it hit the energy-absorbent floor. Whoa! Cisco's voice yelped over the intercom from the control booth. He didn't even touch it, and he generated a sonic pressure wave of over 180 decibels. My ears are ringing. Izuku sat up, his own ears buzzing, his arm throbbing. He stared at his hand in horror. I didn't mean to. I just pushed. I know, Barry said, already beside him, helping him to his feet. His expression wasn't angry, just thoughtful. Your body is hardwired to equate power with force. We need to rewire it. That was One for All's song, played way too loud. Now let's try the opposite. Forget One for All exists. Don't even think about it. Just focus on the river. Let the speed force flow. Izuku nodded, his jaw tight with determination. He wouldn't fail again. He walked back to the wall, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm. He took several deep, calming breaths, deliberately pushing the presence of OFA to the back of his mind. He focused only on the golden river, the hum of motion, the river. Just step into the river. He extended his hand again. This time, he didn't try to create a vibration. He tried to allow it. He let the ever-present kinetic energy of the speed force flow into his arm, down to his fingertips. This time it worked. Or rather, it worked too well. His hand began to blur, the motion so fast it became a transparent shimmer. Golden lightning, purer and brighter than before, crackled around his arm. He felt a strange, tingling numbness, a disconnection from the physical world. He pushed his hand forward. There was no resistance. His hand slid into the concrete as if it were water. The sensation was bizarre beyond words. It was cold, not a physical cold, but an absence of feeling, a void where sensation should be. He could feel the molecular structure of the concrete passing through him, a ghost-like pressure that didn't truly touch him. "I'm doing it!" he gasped, a thrill of victory shooting through him. "Barry, I'm doing it!" He pushed his arm in up to the elbow, marveling at the impossible sight. Then, satisfied, he tried to pull it back. It wouldn't move. The thrill of victory turned to ice-cold panic. He was stuck. His arm, buried deep inside 3 feet of solid concrete, was trapped. The golden lightning fizzled out. The vibration stopped. The horrible, disconnected feeling remained, but now it was coupled with the terrifying reality of being fused with the wall. Barry?" he squeaked, his voice cracking. I can't get it out." In the control room, Caitlin's eyes were wide. "His molecules have semi-stabilized while interspersed with the concrete's molecular lattice. If he tries to pull back by force, the sheer stress will." She trailed off, not needing to finish the gruesome thought. Barry was already moving. "Don't panic, Izuku. And whatever you do, do not use one for all." He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, and another on his trapped arm. "This happens. It happened to me with a bank vault door in my first month. It's a rite of passage. You overshot the frequency on the way in, and now you can't find it again on the way out. I'm going to help you." Barry closed his eyes. Calm, controlled golden lightning enveloped both of them. Izuku felt a powerful, rhythmic vibration flow from Barry's hands into his own body. It wasn't chaotic like his own attempts. It was a perfect, steady pulse. Barry was manually vibrating Izuku's arm, searching for the release frequency. "There," Barry murmured. With a strange, sucking sensation, Izuku's arm slid free from the wall, completely unharmed. He stumbled back, cradling his arm, which felt cold and alien, the pins and needles sensation slowly returning as blood flow normalized. He stared at the pristine wall, then at his own solid hand, his mind reeling. "That was the Speed Force's song," Barry explained, his voice patient. "You learn the melody, but you don't know how to end the piece. You're all gas, no brakes." Frustration, hot and bitter, began to well up in Izuku's chest. He was failing. Spectacularly. He was either a bomb or a statue. There was no middle ground. He had been given access to not one, but 2 of the most incredible powers in existence, and he was too broken, too much of a failure, to use either. Again, he bit out, his voice low. For the next several hours, the training chamber became Izuku's personal crucible. The cycle of failure repeated, each attempt a new and inventive disaster. He tried to find a middle ground, to gently blend the 2 energies. The result was a low-level vibration that did nothing to the wall but slowly superheated his own body. He stood there for 5 minutes, sweat pouring down his face, the smart fabric of his suit registering a dangerous spike in his core temperature before Caitlin's urgent voice over the intercom forced him to stop. He tried again, and this time a single, lashing tendril of green and gold energy shot from his hand and carved a molten gouge into the far wall, 50 feet from his target. He tried to be gentle, to coax the power, and ended up accidentally phasing his foot 6 inches into the floor, requiring Barry's help once again to get it free. Finally, after one more failed attempt where he simply stood there, trembling, unable to make either energy obey his will, he snapped. He let out a raw, guttural yell of pure frustration and slammed his fist, his solid, non-vibrating, unpowered fist, against the concrete wall. The impact sent a sharp pain up his arm, but it was nothing compared to the agony in his heart. "I can't do it!" he shouted at the wall, at the room, at himself. Tears of frustration pricked at the corners of his eyes, and he hated himself for their weakness. "It's impossible! I'm a failure! I was Deku, useless, before I got my quirk, and now I have 2 powers and I'm still just as useless." He slid down the wall, his back scraping against the rough concrete, and buried his face in his hands. The weight of it all came crashing down. The legacy of All Might, the hope of his friends, the trusting faces of the people he'd sworn to protect. He was failing every single one of them. He was a paradox, a broken hero, a cosmic mistake trapped a universe away from home. "I can't be a hero like this," he whispered, his voice thick with despair. "I can't save anyone." The chamber was silent for a long moment, the only sound Izuku's ragged breathing. He expected a lecture or perhaps pity. What he got was the soft sound of Barry sitting down on the floor beside him, his back also against the wall. For a while they just sat there. Barry didn't say anything, just handed Izuku the second, still unopened water bottle. The simple, quiet act of companionship was more comforting than any words could have been. Finally Barry spoke, his voice soft. You know, the first time I tried to phase, I was trying to stop a robbery at Central City Bank. Captain Cold was there, had everyone frozen. I figured I'll just vibrate through the vault door, grab the diamonds they're stealing, and be a hero. Seemed easy enough. He chuckled, a dry, self-deprecating sound. I vibrated right into the middle of a foot of solid steel, and then solidified. Broke my arm in 3 places. The pain was incredible. I was stuck inside the vault door for 20 minutes, screaming my head off, until Cisco figured out how to remotely vibrate the entire door to get me out. Captain Cold got away. A security guard got frostbite, and I got a cast and the worst lecture of my life from my predecessor, Jay Garrick. Izuku lifted his head, his tear-streaked face a mask of surprise. You failed? Miserably, Barry said with a shrug. I thought having speed meant I had to be perfect, instant. I thought it was a tool, a weapon I could just point and shoot. I saw it as something I had to command, something to use. And I kept failing. I kept overshooting, running into things, creating sonic booms that shattered windows for blocks. I was a menace, because I was fighting it. I was trying to force the Speed Force to do what I wanted. He turned to look at Izuku, his gaze serious and kind. You're doing the same thing. You're trying to wrestle these 2 colossal powers into submission. It's a fight you can't win. You have to change the entire game. Barry leaned forward, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. Here's the secret, Izuku. The one that took me years to understand. The Speed Force isn't a tool. It's a partner. It doesn't respond to commands. It responds to intent. It's a dance, not a fight. Stop trying to use the power. Just be with it. Tell it what you want to accomplish, not what you want it to do. Izuku stared at him, confusion warring with a dawning sense of understanding. I don't understand. What is the single, purest reason you want to be a hero? Barry asked, his question sharp and direct. The answer came without hesitation, a fundamental truth at the core of Izuku's being. To save people, he said. To be a symbol, like All Might, who can make everyone feel safe just by smiling. Exactly, Barry said, his own smile returning. That's your intent. That's your truth. It's the purest motivation I've ever seen. Purer than mine was when I started. That is your key. Not the desire for power, not the need to smash things. The desire to save. When you go back to that wall, don't think about vibrating. Don't think about frequencies or molecules or one for all or the Speed Force. Think about the face of someone you want to protect. Think about reaching through that wall to pull them from a fire. Let your heart tell the power what to do, not your head. Barry stood up and offered a hand to Izuku. The goal isn't to be strong. It's to be in tune. Now try it again. Not as a fighter. As a hero. Izuku took his hand and let Barry pull him to his feet. The despair hadn't vanished, but it was now joined by a fragile, flickering ember of hope. Let your heart tell the power what to do. He walked back to the concrete wall, his steps slow and deliberate. He didn't feel like a fighter approaching an opponent. He felt calm. He placed his hand a few inches from the cool, gray surface. He closed his eyes. He didn't try to suppress one for all. He didn't try to command the Speed Force. He just let them be, the roaring fire and the rushing river, and into the chaos between them, he projected a single, clear thought. He pictured his mother's face, her tearful smile when he got into UA. He pictured All Might's proud, skeletal form giving him a thumbs up. He pictured Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, all of his friends fighting alongside him. He pictured the terrified face of the little girl he'd saved just before being ripped from his world, and the overwhelming relief he felt when he knew she was safe. I want to save them. I need the strength to protect them. I need to be able to reach them, no matter what stands in the way. He wasn't asking for power. He was expressing a need. A purpose. And the universe answered. The internal war inside him didn't stop, but its nature changed. It was no longer a grinding, destructive conflict. The roaring fire of one for all didn't diminish, but it condensed, its rage becoming a focused, white-hot point of determination. The rushing river of the speed force didn't recede, but it began to flow around that point of heat, embracing it, channeling it. They found a harmony, a symbiotic rhythm, a dance. A vibration started in his hand, steady and controlled. He looked down. The lightning that flickered around his arm was breathtaking. It was no longer just the familiar, vibrant green of one for all. It was a beautiful, intricate braid of emerald and gold, intertwined so perfectly they seemed like a single, new color. The green provided the substance, the raw, living energy. The gold provided the motion, the perfect, frictionless path. It didn't feel like pain. It felt like potential. With a deep breath, holding the image of his friends and his mentor in his mind, he pushed his hand forward. It slid into the wall. The sensation was completely different from before. It wasn't the cold, disconnected void. It was a clean, frictionless passage. He felt a sense of awe, of wonder. He pushed his arm in up to the elbow, the braided green-gold light illuminating the solid concrete from within. Then, with the same clear intent, he pulled back. His arm slid out as easily as it went in. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, staring at his hand, solid and unharmed, then back at the pristine wall. A single, choked laugh escaped his lips. Then another. Soon, he was laughing freely, tears of relief and joy streaming down his face this time. In the control booth, Cisco threw his hands in the air with a triumphant whoop. Caitlin watched her monitors, a genuine, relieved smile on her face. The two energy waveforms on her screen were no longer clashing. They were moving in a perfect, synchronous sine wave. Barry Allen stood in the doorway of the training chamber, leaning against the frame, his arms crossed. He wasn't smiling. He was beaming, a look of immense pride on his face. Izuku finally turned, his eyes shining. I did it. Yes, you did, Barry said, his voice full of warmth. You took the first step. It was a small victory. He couldn't run at super speed yet. He couldn't throw a punch. All he had done was phase his hand through a wall. But it was more than that. It was a new law of motion. His law. He had found the quiet center of his storm, and for the first time since arriving in this new world, Izuku Midoriya felt the unmistakable, electrifying spark of hope. He wasn't a broken hero. He was becoming something new. The days that followed Izuku's breakthrough were a study in quiet obsession. The grand, cavernous training facility became his sanctuary and his classroom. The concrete wall was his partner in a strange, silent dance. He spent hours practicing, the initial, blinding joy of success solidifying into a focused, determined methodology. He learned the feeling of the braided green and gold lightning, a sensation he was beginning to associate not with pain, but with a clean, humming potential. He could phase his hand through the wall now with near-perfect consistency. Then his arm. Then, after one terrifying moment where he got his head stuck and Barry had to calmly talk him out of it, he could phase his entire upper body. It was progress, tangible and real, but it was also slow and passive. Izuku Midoriya was not a passive person. His spirit was forged in action, in forward momentum, in the desperate, selfless drive to throw himself between danger and the innocent. This careful, meditative practice felt like learning to write poetry when all he wanted to do was scream a battle cry. He stood in the center of the training floor, rhythmically phasing his hand in and out of a holographic target. The process was becoming second nature. The mental trigger, that pure, clear intent to save, was now a well-worn path in his mind. But it wasn't enough. This is great, Izuku, it really is, Barry said, walking up behind him. He'd been observing from the side, nursing a coffee. Your control is 1,000 times better than it was 3 days ago. You're a natural at the mental component. But it's not enough, Izuku finished, his voice tight with a familiar frustration. He let his hand become solid, the green and gold lightning dissipating with a soft sizzle. Phasing is incredible. It's a power most heroes in my world would dream of. But it's a defensive, stealth-oriented skill. I can't save someone from a collapsing building by sticking my hand through a wall. I need to move. I need to be strong. I need. Full cowling. He looked at Barry, his eyes pleading. There has to be a way. You saw it. In that moment, when I phased the two energies, they weren't fighting. They were working together. What if we could apply that same principle to my whole body? To movement? Barry took a long sip of his coffee, his brow furrowed in thought. He had been pondering this very question since the moment he saw the two waveforms on Caitlin's monitor synchronize. The disastrous test on the cosmic treadmill had been a head-on collision. The phasing was a delicate truce. What Izuku was proposing was a full-blown military alliance. I have a theory, Barry said slowly, setting his mug down on a nearby console. It's dangerous. And it will require more focus than you've ever used in your life. But it might just work. He gestured for Izuku to follow him to the center of the room, where a large holographic display shimmered to life at Barry's command. Let's go back to basics. Your quirk, one for all, is like a nuclear reactor inside you. It's a massive, near-infinite source of raw, explosive power. When you use full cowling, you're basically opening the vents and letting the radiation flood your system. Your body, through intense training, has become the containment unit. The display showed a glowing green orb, pulsing with violent energy. Cracks appeared on its surface, representing the damage OFA used to do to Izuku's body. The problem, Barry continued, is that the speed force isn't another power source you can just stack on top. The speed force is the system itself. It's the wiring of the universe. When you tried to activate your reactor while plugged into a completely foreign electrical grid, you caused a catastrophic power surge. A meltdown. The hologram showed the golden energy slamming into the green orb, causing a violent, pixelated explosion. Izuku nodded, the memory of the searing pains still vivid. So what's the solution? We change the function, Barry said, his excitement growing. We stop trying to make the speed force a power, and we start using it for what it is, a conduit. The most perfect, frictionless conduit in existence. Think of it like a superconductor. You don't flood your body with the raw radiation of one for all anymore. Instead, you keep the reactor contained, and you channel its immense energy output through the superconductor of the speed force that now runs through your veins. He manipulated the hologram. A network of golden lines, representing the speed force, now wrapped around the green orb. Instead of the orb cracking, a clean, focused beam of green energy flowed from it, into the golden network, and was distributed perfectly, without resistance or feedback. If you can do that, Barry said, his voice filled with awe at the concept, the results would be unprecedented. The speed force would regulate the output of one for all perfectly. You could access higher percentages without any physical backlash because the speed force would be bearing the strain, not your cells. The power of OFA would provide the thrust, and the kinetic nature of the speed force would provide the velocity. You wouldn't just be strong. You wouldn't just be fast. You would be a living bullet train, a guided missile of pure kinetic force. Izuku stared at the hologram, his mind racing, processing the theory at a blistering pace. It made sense. It was elegant. It was terrifying. How? He whispered. How do I do that? The same way you learn to phase, Barry said, his expression turning deadly serious. With intent. But it's more complex now. You need to perform two actions simultaneously in your mind. First, you need to activate one for all, to draw on the power. Second, instead of letting it fill your body, you have to consciously, actively push that power into the speed force. You have to feed the river. You can't let a single drop of OFA spill over into your physical body directly. It must all be channeled. It sounded like trying to pat his head and rub his stomach while juggling chainsaws. He took a deep breath and nodded. Okay. I'm ready. He stood in the center of the room, assuming his familiar fighting stance. The team, Caitlin, Cisco, and Iris, had gathered in the control booth, their faces a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The air was thick with tension. Izuku closed his eyes. He went inward, to that mental space he was becoming so familiar with. There was the caged green sun of one for all, roaring with contained power, and there was the cool, golden river of the speed force, flowing ceaselessly through him. He took a steadying breath. Action 1. Activate OFA. He reached out with his will and touched the green sun. He felt its immense, familiar power begin to well up, the 8 generations of heroes within it stirring in recognition. The desire to let it flood his system, to feel the familiar rush of full cowling, was an almost overwhelming instinct. No. Contain it. He held the power at its source, a ball of pure energy in his spiritual core. It was like holding back a tsunami with his bare hands. Action 2. Push the power into the conduit. With his other hand, spiritually speaking, he opened a channel to the Golden River. Then, with an act of will that was the single most difficult thing he had ever done, he began to push the green energy into the golden one. His first attempt was clumsy. He opened the floodgates too wide. A violent jolt racked his body. He cried out, stumbling back a step. A chaotic mix of green and gold lightning flared around him for a single, painful second before sputtering out. It wasn't the agonizing meltdown from before, but it was a sharp, painful shock, like grabbing a faulty electrical socket. Izuku! Caitlin's voice crackled over the intercom. Your biometrics spiked. It was unstable. Abort! No, Izuku grunted, shaking his head to clear it. He could still feel the phantom sting of the energy backlash. No, I can do this. I felt it. For a second it worked. I gave it too much. He's right, Barry said, his eyes glued to the energy readings on his wrist-mounted device. The flow was there, but the volume was too high. It was like trying to force a fire hose through a garden hose. You blew the connection. He looked at Izuku. Don't just open the floodgates. You need a valve. A tap. You need to be precise. Control the percentage. Percentage. The word struck Izuku like a bolt of lightning. The microwave. The egg. The dial. His entire journey with One for All had been about learning to control the percentage. That was the key. He wasn't just dumping power. He had to meter it. He closed his eyes again, his resolve hardening into a diamond point. He went back to that internal space. He held the green sun of OFA at bay. He opened the channel to the golden river of the speed force. But this time, he visualized a dial between them, just like the one on the microwave in his vision from the sports festival. It was a golden dial set against a green background, marked from 0 to 100. He pictured himself reaching out and turning the dial. Not to 5 or 8%, his old comfortable limits. He knew instinctively that this new method was more efficient. It required a higher baseline to even function. He remembered Barry's words, a living bullet train. He needed more fuel. He turned the dial to 25. There was no jolt. There was no pain. There was only a perfect, harmonious hum that resonated from the core of his being. He felt the raw, untamed power of One for All flow from its source, but instead of crashing through his body, it was drawn smoothly into the golden channels of the speed force. The river did not overflow. It swelled, turning from a calm stream into a raging, powerful torrent of green and gold. The energy didn't flood his muscles. It wrapped around them, a frictionless sheath of pure kinetic potential. He opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands. A breathtakingly beautiful aura of light enveloped his entire body. It was a whirlwind of the purest emerald green he had ever produced, shot through with thick, vibrant veins of crackling speed force gold. The two colors danced and intertwined in a perfect, stable helix. The air around him thrummed, not with destructive power, but with clean, controlled energy. There was no strain. No aching bones. No feeling of his body about to tear itself apart. There was only power. Smooth, limitless, and ready. Whoa, Cisco breathed from the control booth, his face pressed against the glass. The readings, they're stable. They're perfectly, impossibly stable. Barry, look at this efficiency curve. He's outputting the kinetic energy equivalent of 25% of OFA, but his biological stress levels are near baseline. It's perfect. Izuku took a tentative step. The movement was effortless. He felt light, untethered from the normal laws of friction and inertia. He took another step, faster this time, and then another. He wasn't just running. He felt like he was being propelled by the universe itself. He pushed off the floor and shot across the vast training chamber, covering 200 meters in the blink of an eye. He was a comet of green and gold. He tried to stop, planting his feet, and the force of his deceleration gouged 2 clean trenches in the reinforced floor, the air cracking with a miniature sonic boom. He stood there, panting, not from exhaustion, but from sheer exhilaration. He looked back at the incredible distance he had covered. At 20% of his old full cowling, that would have taken him several seconds and immense strain. He had just done it in an instant. Full cowling, he whispered, the name feeling inadequate. This was a new evolution, a new state of being. Full cowling, velocity. A wide, uncontrollable grin spread across his face. It was the first genuine, purely joyful smile he'd had since arriving in this world. It worked. Barry was grinning too, a look of paternal pride and scientific triumph on his face. Okay, hotshot. You've got the engine running. Now let's see if you can drive. He tapped his earpiece. Wally, you up? A new voice, younger and buzzing with energy, replied instantly. Been waiting for the signal, Uncle B. Is the new guy ready to play? A blur of red and yellow suddenly streaked into the training chamber, zipping around the perimeter in a crackle of lightning before skidding to a halt in front of Izuku. The newcomer was a teenager, probably around Izuku's age, with bright red hair that stuck out from the top of his open cowl. His suit was a vibrant yellow with red accents, the inverse of Barry's, with a similar lightning bolt insignia. He vibrated with an almost puppy-like energy, his grin wide and infectious. So you're the dimensional castaway, he said, zipping around Izuku in a circle so fast he was just a colored blur. Kid Flash. Pleasure to meet ya. Heard you make things go boom. Try to keep up, okay? Izuku blinked, his head spinning from the casual display of speed. This was Wally West, another speedster. He radiated a confidence and an effortless grace that Izuku found both intimidating and amazing. The goal here is control, not a race, Barry's voice reminded them from the sidelines. Wally, your job is to test his agility and reaction time. Izuku, your job is to keep velocity active and stay in one piece. No offensive moves unless I say so. This is a spar. A dance. Begin. Wally's grin widened. You heard the man. Let's dance. He vanished. Izuku's eyes couldn't track him. All he felt was a series of light taps on his helmet from 5 different directions in the span of a single second. He's too fast. Izuku's analytical mind screamed. His old full cowling wouldn't have stood a chance. But this was different. He didn't have to rely on his own reaction time. He could feel the speed force, a tingling, precognitive sense that warned him of motion around him. It was a subtle whisper, a change in the flow of the river. Wally reappeared in front of him, preparing to flick his forehead. The whisper in Izuku's mind became a shout. Left. Izuku moved. He didn't think, he reacted. He ducked to the left, the motion so swift and frictionless that Wally's hand passed through the space where his head had been. Wally's eyes widened in surprise. Whoa! Not bad, Green Bean. Got some moves. He took off again, a yellow streak painting lines across the floor and walls. He was a hummingbird, changing direction with impossible ease, defying gravity as he ran horizontally across the chamber wall. He was pure, joyful motion. Izuku pushed off, the green and gold aura flaring. He tried to follow, but his movements were different. He was a cannonball. When he moved with immense, straight-line power. Turning was harder, requiring a conscious effort to shift his momentum. He was less agile, but the raw power behind every step was terrifying. He pushed off the floor to intercept Wally on the wall, and the spot he just vacated cracked under the strain. The spar was a breathtaking spectacle of light and sound. A blur of red and yellow, followed by a roaring comet of green and gold. Wally was all finesse, dancing and weaving, using his superior agility and experience to stay just out of reach. Izuku was all power, his movements creating small sonic booms as he tried to predict and intercept Wally's path. You're like a runaway freight train. Wally laughed, easily dodging as Izuku shot past him. You gotta learn to corner better. To prove his point, Wally ran up a wall, did a backflip over Izuku, and landed behind him. Izuku, feeling the shift in the speed force, tried to pivot. He dug his heels in, the metal of his boots groaning, and spun around, a whirlwind of kinetic energy. Wally, not expecting such a powerful and abrupt change in direction, had to phase through the floor to avoid the shockwave of displaced air that erupted from Izuku's turn. He popped back up 10 feet away, his cocky grin replaced by a look of genuine shock. "Geez! What are you running on, rocket fuel?" Wally exclaimed. "I felt that gust through the floor. We need to test the bullet train theory," Barry's voice cut in. "Izuku, on my mark, I want you to throw a punch. Aim for the high-density target dummy on the far wall." Wally, stay clear. A humanoid target, made of a dark, metallic composite, rose from the floor near the back of the chamber. Izuku took a deep breath, planting his feet. He drew his fist back, the green and gold lightning coalescing around his arm. He wasn't just charging a smash. He was focusing the kinetic potential of his entire body into a single point. "Mark!" Izuku threw the punch. Wally, watching from a safe distance, saw him execute a perfect right straight. But he was a good 30 feet from the target. Wally almost laughed, thinking the kid had misjudged the distance. Izuku's fist stopped, snapping forward into empty air. But the power didn't stop. A nearly invisible distortion, a shockwave of pure kinetic force, shot from his fist. It crossed the 30-foot gap in a thousandth of a second. There was no explosion, no grand light show. Just a sharp crack like a rifle shot. The top half of the high-density target dummy simply disintegrated. It didn't explode. It didn't get pushed back. The molecules it was made of were subjected to such an intense, focused kinetic blow that they were violently sheared apart. The lower half of the dummy remained standing for a second before toppling over with a sad clang. Silence reigned in the training chamber. Wally West, the kid who had once outraced Superman, stared with his jaw hanging open. He looked from the vaporized target to Izuku, who was looking at his own fist in a mixture of awe and terror. "Holy, what was that?" Wally breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "That wasn't a punch. That was a railgun." "That," Barry said, walking onto the floor, a look of profound gravity on his face, "is the difference. A sledgehammer, even a big one, just pushes. A bullet, a tiny piece of metal, transfers its kinetic energy so efficiently it passes right through. Izuku, you no longer hit with the force of a sledgehammer. You hit with the force of an impact." Izuku slowly uncurled his fist. He could feel the power of velocity still coursing through him, a smooth, endless river. He had done it. He had a new power, one that was uniquely his, born from the clash of two worlds. He was stronger than before, faster than before, and he hadn't broken a single bone. The spar continued for another 10 minutes, but the dynamic had shifted. Wally was far more cautious, his playful teasing replaced by a healthy dose of respect. He still danced around Izuku, his agility unmatched, but he never got too close, clearly wary of that terrifying, invisible force. Izuku, in turn, began to learn. He watched Wally, analyzing his effortless movements, the way he used his momentum, the way he became one with the flow. He was still a cannonball, but he was learning that he could be a cannonball that changed direction. When Barry finally called an end to the session, both teenagers were panting, their suits steaming slightly. "You're crazy strong," Wally admitted, giving Izuku a tired but genuine grin. "Like scary, don't make this guy mad strong. But you run like you're angry at the ground. You gotta loosen up. Feel the flow. And you're impossibly fast," Izuku replied, equally exhausted but buzzing with everything he'd learned. "It's like you're not even trying. It's like you're just playing. That's the point." Wally laughed. "It's supposed to be fun." They shared a fist bump, a silent acknowledgement of a new rivalry and a budding friendship. Wally zipped off with a final "see ya, green bean," leaving Izuku alone with Barry and the lingering hum of his new power. He let full calling velocity fade. The green and gold aura receded, the humming ceased, and he was left standing in the quiet room, feeling the familiar weight of his own body. He was tired, but it was a good tired. The satisfying ache of muscles pushed to a new limit, not the agony of a body breaking apart. "You did good, Izuku," Barry said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Really good. You have a long way to go in terms of finesse, but the foundation, it's solid. It's more than solid. It's groundbreaking." Izuku looked at his hands, then at Barry, a profound sense of gratitude welling up inside him. He had been lost, broken, a paradox on the verge of self-destruction, and this man, this hero from another world, had not seen him as a problem to be solved, but as a student to be taught. "Thank you, Barry," Izuku said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Barry just smiled. "All in a day's work. Now let's get you some food. According to Cisco, your caloric intake is about to get astronomical." As they walked out of the training chamber, Izuku felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just the inheritor of One for All. He was the wielder of velocity, and he was one step closer to finding his way home, armed with a power that neither his world, nor this one, had ever seen before. The blur of pure heroic potential was finally coming into focus. The obstacle course was a kinetic nightmare, a symphony of motion designed by a sadist with a degree in engineering. Pistons shot out from the walls with bone-snapping force. Platforms dropped away into dark pits without warning. Laser grids flickered to life, forming intricate, impassable webs. For a normal person, it was a death trap. For a speedster, it was a playground. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a final exam he had to ace every single day. A whirlwind of green and gold lightning, he shot through the chaos. Full cowling, velocity was active, a humming sheath of perfectly controlled power that felt as natural as breathing now. A piston shot out from his right. He didn't dodge. He phased. The solid steel cylinder passed harmlessly through his shoulder, the sensation a familiar, cool tingle. The platform beneath his feet vanished. He didn't fall. He pushed off the open air, a concussive blast of kinetic force from his soles giving him just enough lift to clear the gap. A wall of red lasers appeared before him. He didn't stop. He ran straight up the adjacent wall, his boots finding purchase where there should be none, and flipped over the grid, landing in a perfect three-point stance. He was getting better. Faster. More controlled. The raw, concussive power of One for All, filtered through the frictionless conduit of the speed force, gave him a style that was uniquely his. He wasn't as graceful as Barry or as joyfully chaotic as Wally. He was a force of nature, a guided meteor, each movement precise and devastatingly powerful. But as he stood there, panting lightly in the center of the now dormant course, the exhilaration was tinged with a familiar, hollow ache. Every success, every new feat of power, was a reminder of how far he was from where he was supposed to be. He could run up walls and phase through steel, but he couldn't take a single step toward home. He could master the laws of motion in this universe, but he couldn't escape it. The thought was a constant, low-level hum of anxiety beneath the roaring power of his new abilities. He missed the familiar weight of Muzutafu's air. He missed the taste of his mother's katsudon. He missed the sound of Bakugo's infuriated yelling, Ida's frantic chopping motions, Uraraka's bright, infectious laugh. He missed All Might's guidance. He was a hero in training, but he was also just a boy, a universe away from his life. "Nice run," Barry's voice called out. He was leaning against the entrance, a tablet in his hand. "Your energy efficiency is up another 3%. You're adapting to this faster than anyone I've ever seen." Izuku let the power fade, the green and gold aura receding into his skin. "It still feels borrowed," he admitted, walking over to grab a towel. "This power. This place. It's not mine." Barry's smile was sympathetic. "I get it. But while you're here, you might as well get good at it." His expression shifted, a flicker of something new in his eyes. "Speaking of which, Cisco's been working on something. He thinks he might have a lead." Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the speed force. A lead. It was the first real glimmer of hope he'd had in weeks. A lead? On what? A way home? "Maybe," Barry said, his tone cautious, clearly trying to manage expectations. "It's a long shot, Izuku. The longest. But it's not zero." He followed Barry out of the training facility and back into the Cortex, the lab's main command center. The scene that greeted him was one of organized chaos. Cisco Ramon was at the center of it, looking like a mad scientist who had lost a fight with his own creation. His hair was a mess, his eyes were bloodshot behind a pair of blue light-blocking glasses, and he was surrounded by a fortress of empty coffee cups and discarded energy drink cans. The main holographic display, usually showing city schematics or team vitals, was now a swirling, incomprehensible mass of cosmic static. White bars were covered from top to bottom with equations that made Izuku's head spin, a mix of quantum mechanics, theoretical physics, and what looked suspiciously like doodles of movie monsters. "Talk to me, Cisco," Barry said, his voice soft. "I've been going about it all wrong," Cisco muttered, not looking up from his console. His fingers were a blur across the holographic keyboard. "I've been searching for the tear. The point of entry, trying to retrace the path of the storm. But that's like trying to find a single raindrop in the middle of a hurricane after it's already made landfall. The residual energy is too chaotic, too degraded." He spun around in his chair, a wild, manic gleam in his eyes. "But then it hit me. I don't need to find the path. I need to find the destination. I need a lock-on. A signature. A clear, pure audio signal to search for amongst the noise of the multiverse." "A signature?" Izuku asked, stepping forward. "Like my energy? Exactly!" Cisco exclaimed, pointing a finger at him. "But your energy signature since you got here has been a mess. A beautiful, glorious, please don't explode near the good server's mess. The clash, the feedback, the instability, it's all noise." "But," he pulled up a file on the main screen. It was the data log from the day Izuku first learned to phase. A single, perfect sine wave of green and gold glowed on the display. "This," Cisco said, his voice dropping with reverence. "This is your signal. The moment of perfect harmony. The one, pure note in the middle of all the cosmic static. It's your universe's unique dimensional frequency, perfectly in tune with the speed force. It's a key. I can use this. I can broadcast this note across the dimensional spectrum. It's like shouting your name in a crowded stadium, and hoping someone with the same name shouts back." The hope in Izuku's chest swelled, threatening to burst. "You can do that?" "I can try," Cisco said, his confidence returning. "I've repurposed the deep space transmitter and cross-wired it with the vibrational tachyon emitters from the treadmill. It's a cosmic tuning fork. It's either going to pinpoint your Earth's frequency, or it's going to accidentally order a pizza from a dimension where people are made of pineapple. It's a 50-50 shot, really." Despite the joke, his hands were steady, his focus absolute. He was a genius at work. Caitlin and Iris had entered the cortex, drawn by the shift in energy. They stood back, watching, their faces etched with a nervous hope that mirrored Izuku's own. "Okay," Cisco said, taking a deep, theatrical breath. "Transmitter is charged. Harmonic frequency is isolated. Broadcasting the Midoriya chord in 3, 2, 1. He pressed the final icon on his console. A low, powerful hum filled the lab, vibrating through the floor and up into Izuku's bones. The swirling static on the main screen intensified, the visual representation of a signal being sent out into the infinite void. For a long minute, nothing happened. The hum continued, and the static swirled. The hope in Izuku's chest began to curdle into disappointment. It was a long shot, Barry had said. A long shot that was about to miss. "Signals propagating," Cisco murmured, his eyes scanning a dozen different data streams. "But there's no resonance. Nothing's bouncing back. It's just getting lost in the..." He stopped. A single, tiny point of light had appeared in the swirling gray static. It was faint, a distant star in a cosmic fog. "Whoa," Cisco breathed. "I've got something." A harmonic echo. Faint, but it's there. The point of light flickered. A crackle of static came through the lab's main speakers, the sound of a radio trying to find a station. "Eve, search, negative, no sign of..." The voice was distorted, broken, and utterly alien. Izuku's shoulders slumped. It was just a random signal. "Wait," Iris said, her reporter's instincts kicking in. "Cisco, can you clear that up? Filter out the interference." "On it," Cisco said, his fingers flying. He isolated the signal, applying a dozen different filters. The static lessened, the voice becoming clearer, though still faint and tinny. "Repeat, grid 7 is negative. No sign of the boy. Over." The words were Japanese. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. And then another voice crackled through the speaker, a voice that shattered Izuku's world and rebuilt it in the space of a single heartbeat. It was a voice he knew better than his own, a voice that was both booming and strained, powerful and weary. Keep searching. We do not stop. We do not rest until we find him. Do you understand me? It was All Might. All Might. Izuku gasped, stumbling forward, his hand outstretched toward the screen as if he could reach through it. That's him. That's All Might. Barry put a steadying hand on his shoulder. Cisco, can we establish a two-way link? Can he hear us? The connection is a spider's thread. Cisco yelled, sweat beading on his forehead. It's audio only, and it's unstable as hell. I can try to punch our audio through, but it could collapse the whole link. It's now or never. Do it! Izuku pleaded, his eyes wide with desperation. Cisco slammed his hand down on the console. Punching through, a loud burst of static erupted from the speakers, and then silence. For a heart-stopping second, Izuku thought the connection was lost. Then, he heard it again. All Might's voice, now closer, more confused. What was that? A feedback loop? Someone get that analyst from the support course back on the line. All Might! Izuku shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. All Might, can you hear me? It's me. It's Midoriya. The silence on the other end was absolute. It stretched for an eternity. The team in the cortex held their breath. Then, a shaky, disbelieving whisper came through the speaker. Young Midoriya. No. It can't be. You're gone. No. I'm not gone. Izuku cried, tears streaming freely down his face now. I'm alive. I was pulled through a portal, a villain's quirk. I'm somewhere else. In another dimension. He could hear a commotion on the other end. A sharp intake of breath. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Another voice, calm and intelligent, like a mouse or a bear, spoke briefly. Toshinori, stay calm. Keep him talking. Nizu. Then All Might's voice returned, laced with an impossible, dawning hope. Another dimension? Young Midoriya, where are you? Are you safe? Are you hurt? The frantic panic was being overridden by mentally concern. I'm safe, Izuku said, trying to get the words out as quickly as he could, terrified the connection would break. I'm with other heroes. They're helping me. I'm in a city called Central City. The hero who found me, his name is the Flash. There was another pause. He could almost hear All Might processing the impossible information, filing it away. The Flash, All Might repeated, the name foreign on his tongue. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and when he spoke again, the relief in his voice was a tangible thing, a wave of warmth that crossed the unfathomable gulf between worlds. You are alive. You are with heroes. Thank goodness. Izuku could picture him perfectly, slumped in a chair, his skeletal form trembling not with weakness, but with overwhelming relief. The connection unstable. Cisco warned, his eyes wide with strain. I can't hold it for much longer. 30 seconds, maybe. Panic flared in Izuku's chest. So little time. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he wanted to ask. Are you okay? Are the others okay? Is my mom? But he was a hero. And so was the man on the other end of the line. Listen to me, young Midoriya. All Might's voice came through, stronger now, filled with the unwavering conviction of the former symbol of peace. We will find a way to bring you home. I swear it on my life. But until then, you are where you are for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. The signal began to break up, All Might's voice dissolving into static. Learn everything you can, a hero, not just a student. All Might, I can't hear you. Izuku yelled desperately. The voice cleared for one final, powerful moment. The words were a clarion call. A new mission statement that would define Izuku's existence. You were meant to be a symbol, young Midoriya. A symbol of hope. Perhaps you were meant to be a symbol for more than just one world. Trust the heroes you are with. Learn from them. Grow, and make us proud. I will. Izuku shouted at the screen, tears blurring his vision. I promise. I'll make you proud. Always, my boy. With a final, deafening screech of static, the connection collapsed. The point of light on the screen vanished. The voice was gone. The link was broken. Silence descended upon the cortex. The only sound was the quiet hum of the computers and Izuku's own ragged, hitching sobs. He stood there for a moment, frozen, his entire body trembling. Then the strength went out of his legs. The adrenaline from the call vanished, and in its place was a tidal wave of emotion so powerful it buckled his knees. He sank to the floor, burying his face in his hands, and wept. It was a storm of relief, grief, joy, and a profound, soul-crushing homesickness. He was alive. They knew he was alive. All Might was okay, but hearing his mentor's voice, so close and yet so impossibly far, had only sharpened the pain of his isolation. Home had never felt farther away. The teen gave him a moment, a respectful silence for the magnitude of what had just happened. Then, he felt a gentle hand on his back. He looked up to see Iris kneeling beside him, her expression one of deep, maternal empathy. She didn't offer platitudes or false promises. She just handed him a box of tissues. I can't even begin to imagine what that must feel like, she said softly. He took a tissue, wiping at his eyes. He's okay, he whispered, the words a mantra. They're all okay. They're looking for me. And we're looking for them, Barry said, his voice firm. He was kneeling on Izuku's other side. Cisco recorded the frequency. We have the key now, Izuku. It's not a closed door anymore. It's just a locked one. And we're going to find a way to open it. Cisco, looking utterly drained but triumphant, gave him a weak thumbs up from his chair. We got the address. Now we just gotta build the car. Later that evening, the weight of the day settled heavily on Izuku's shoulders. The initial relief had faded, leaving behind the heavy sediment of homesickness. He sat in the Cortex's small lounge area, staring blankly at a Star Labs mug filled with tea Caitlin had made him, the liquid long since gone cold. He heard footsteps and looked up to see Barry and Iris approaching, holding a greasy-looking paper bag that smelled heavenly. We figured you might be hungry, Iris said, placing the bag on the table. And that tea looks tragic. This is from a place called Big Belly Burger. It's a Central City staple. According to Barry, it has restorative properties. Barry pulled a burger wrapped in checkered paper from the bag and handed it to Izuku. One double-double with extra cheese. Cures everything from a broken heart to a temporal headache. Izuku took it, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. He took a bite. It was greasy, salty, and probably terrible for him, but it was also one of the most delicious things he'd ever tasted. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time since the call had ended. It's good. They sat with him in comfortable silence for a while, eating their own burgers. It wasn't a team of superheroes and their dimensional guest. It was just three people sharing a meal. It's hard, Barry said finally, breaking the silence. Being a hero. The sacrifices. The things you miss. He looked at Iris, a silent conversation passing between them. When I first got my speed, all I wanted to do was go back. Fix things. Fix the biggest, most painful thing in my past. I had the power to do it. The temptation, it was overwhelming. Izuku looked at him, recognizing the familiar pain of a hero's burden in his eyes. But I learned that our powers aren't for that, Barry continued, his gaze finding Izuku's. They're not for fixing our own pasts. They're for ensuring others get to have a future. What you did today, what you do every day you're here, you're honoring him. You're All Might. You're living up to his faith in you. He told me to learn, Izuku said quietly, staring at his half-eaten burger. To be a symbol, for more than one world. He sounds like a smart man, Iris said with a warm smile. And he's right. This place. Star Labs, it's not just a lab. It's not just a base. It's a home, filled with a bunch of weird, brilliant, broken people who found each other. And for as long as you need to be here, Izuku, you're a part of it. Your family. The word resonated deep inside him. He looked at Barry, the mentor who had taught him to control the storm inside him. At Iris, whose kindness had been a constant anchor. At Cisco and Caitlin in the other room, the brilliant, bickering siblings who had built a bridge across universes for him. They weren't his friends from UA. They weren't All Might. But Iris was right. They were a family. A strange, impossible, wonderful family. The homesickness was still there, a dull ache in his heart. It might never fully go away. But for the first time, it was joined by something else. A sense of belonging. He had a glimmer of home to hold on to, a promise that he wasn't forgotten. And he had a family here, to help him through the days until that promise could be fulfilled. He took another bite of his burger, the warmth spreading through him. He had a mission. He had a new power. And he had a home, on both sides of the dimensional veil. The path forward was still uncertain, but for the first time, it wasn't dark. It was illuminated by a glimmer of hope.